today's webinar, Power Prism, Strategies for Advocacy for Your Coalition and for Engaging Youth. We are so excited to have you all join us today, albeit virtually. My name is Diane Pickles. We're going to be introducing all of us in a moment, but just a couple of quick logistics. Since we are a large audience today, we're going to keep all the phones on mute. But at any time, feel free to submit a question using the question box on your dashboard. We would ask you to use that function instead of chat, just makes it a little easier for us. And also instead of raising your hand, actually type in your question. Raising your hand just shows us that you have a question, doesn't actually show us what the question is. So I think without further ado, we will jump right in and get into introductions and the meat of today's webinar.
Hi, I'm Laurie Frisina. I'm the Senior Vice President from M+R Strategic Services, and I run the New England office. I'm also on the board of Health Resources in Action, so I get to wear two hats today. Just a little about M+R. We are a national consulting firm that works primarily with nonprofits and government agencies, and we have clients who are deeply committed to making the world a better place and are really lucky to be in that space. And Diane and I have both been with M+R just about 6.5 years.
And I am Diane Pickles, and I am Vice President at M+R Strategic Services in the New England office with Laurie. And with us today,
hello, I'm Laurie Jo Wallace. I'm the Director of Training and Capacity Building here at Health Resources in Action. And I've been with the organization for over 20 years, and I've been working with young people my entire career. So, and I feel very honored and privileged to have found a career where I can do that. Health Resources in Action is a broad community-based public health organization. We work a lot with the community, engaging them in public health issues. We also work with policy issues, health communications, research and evaluation, but always back to trying to engage the community in all of those processes. And I'm here with my colleague today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Chen, and I'm a Senior Program Manager at Health Resources in Action, and I've been with Health Resources in Action for the past 7 years. And during my time here, I've had the privilege of working with young people in advocacy around tobacco prevention, obesity prevention, and a number of other health issues. And I'm excited to share some of those experiences with you today.
So we're going to go over the Power Prism, which is an advocacy model that I had the pleasure of developing over the last 12 years or so. Diane and I have gotten to perfect it with a lot of work with our clients. Judy Meredith is a colleague that we helped create this with a long time ago. And it's a framework that we really look at our work through and that our clients ask us for often directly, but they're all getting the thinking that works through the Power Prism. And we have used it with a number of youth-related organizations and youth-run and created organizations, some of which you'll see up on the screen here. And they've used it in different ways over the years. I'm looking at Ignite, which I don't think actually exists anymore, but that was an organization built by and led by youth, and they've used the Power Prism model really for their board development, their structure, and their strategic planning. Others, like Sociedad Latina, have used it for short-term campaign planning, and then still others have really used it for the underpinnings to help them think about their work and what advocacy is and how you do it effectively. In terms of what the Power Prism is, it's really a way of advancing your cause through advocacy, through integrating strategies, through looking at the work that you do through a particular lens that's always focused on building power for your cause by taking advantage of what's going on or creating things that will build power for your particular campaign. You'll hear us talk about power tools, and there are 6 of them that you'll see on screen in a minute. And we're going to give you a very high-level kind of overview of the Power Prism during this webinar because we really want to focus on the youth pieces of it. But if you go to powerprism.org, you can find lots and lots of different examples and tools that may be useful for the work that you're doing. In terms of what advocacy is, if you look at this crabby little kid on the right-hand side of the slide right now, you'll be reminded of bedtime and when you've had to put a child in your home to bed and how they will pressure mom or dad or whoever the adult caregiver is in the home to get out of the designated bedtime. Sometimes they do it by crawling in your lap and asking for another story. Sometimes they yell and scream. Sometimes, like this one, they just make a jailbreak for it and get out of it. But even children, before they are particularly verbal, know how to advocate for things. Advocacy is really just the application of pressure and influence on the people and institutions that have the power to give you what you want. That's all it is. We all do it. We do it without thinking about it. Some of us do it better than others, and we can all do it better if we think about applying some of the power tools to the work that we're doing. But before jumping into what the 6 power tools are, it's important to sort of back up and start at the very beginning of campaigns and advocacy. And the first thing that we work with our folks for, and this is certainly true in working with youth partners as well, is they've got to be able to answer the question, what do you want? What do you want? What is the change that you're seeking to bring about? What's the goal? The second question is, why do you want it? And this really is described by the data that defines the problem you're seeking to fix. So what is it? What's the issue? As well as being able to describe the intervention or the solution that you're putting out there. So there has to be some evidence that what you're putting forward, maybe it's a piece of legislation, maybe it's a new policy, maybe it's a new organization that needs to come to life. There has to be some reason and some evidence that this would be a good strategy. The third question that we need to answer is, who specifically has the power to give it to you? Is it a legislative body? Is it the school board? Is it your parents? Is it teachers? Is it a particular organization in your community? Is it the retail association? Somebody has the power to give it to you. Once those things have been answered, and believe me, those are not easy questions to answer for lots of groups, large and small, that's when you really jump over into the Power Prism and respond to them. Because that's where you really need to start thinking about how you're going to influence your targets. I'm sitting here in a room right now with 5 people, and if we had been able to answer those earlier goals, I would have to think about each of these 5 people, and for each person in this room, something different is going to resonate for them, and I have to really understand who they are, what do they care about, what motivates them, what is in their direct self-interest. Once I've understood that, I'm going to come up with different ways of talking to them, what the messages might be. I might have someone else talk to them and find the best messenger, and I need to figure out the best means for talking to them. Some of these decision makers are paying attention to things like Facebook. Some are paying attention to their peers at school. Some are listening to teachers. Some are listening to traditional media. Whatever it is, there's a way of affecting people, and we need to understand what for each target audience is the best messenger and means for reaching them. The prism is, for those of you who have ever played with a prism and held it up to the light, it's just the image that we like to use to think about our advocacy work, because if you think about holding a prism up to the light goes through it and refracts and becomes more beautiful and more powerful. We think when you look at the mission of your organization or your campaign or the work, your cause, whatever it is, and you look at it through this advocacy prism, you can build power through it by triggering any or all of the 6 power tools. And so that's why we call it the Power Prism. We also very, very deliberately inserted the word power into the name of this model, because we have found that some people who work in the social justice space, the public health space, really resisted power. They thought it was a bad thing or something that maybe they should be sharing all the time. And our thought is, no, it's actually something you should be holding onto for yourselves, building, growing, and using it to advance the things that you care about. And we really encourage people to sort of look for, find, and honor and grow their own power as they're moving through this. So this here is the Power Prism, and these are the 6 power tools, and you're going to hear a very little bit about each of those right now and how they've related to particular youth campaigns and work that HRIA has done. But just to kick it off, the first power tool is research and data collection. And this is the only power tool that has to come in order. It's the only one. The other 5 are interchangeable, but research and data collection absolutely has to come first. There are really 2 types of research. The first type is direct. That means getting the facts straight. What's the science? What's the evidence? What are the pieces of information, personal impact stories that describe, again, the problem, the situation, what you're trying to do? It would be probably crazy for us to put forth a proposal that had no foundation in reality or experience, particularly for folks working in the public health space or criminal justice, juvenile justice, education. We have to really be legitimate. So we have to do our homework. But the fun part, and sort of the other, I always call it the sexier part of the research, is the more nuanced research. And this is really spending at least as much time figuring out who your decision makers are, what makes them tick, who do they care about, who are their allies, who do they listen to, who funds them, what do you know about your opposition, what does your opposition what's their sort of relationship and relevance to the key decision makers. All those sort of pieces of information, the more nuanced stuff, the kinds of things you can maybe pick up from Google or from talking to other people who may know these decision makers. That information is critical because that really tells you, again, back to who your messages and means should be for getting to understand these folks. This gentleman up here on the right is Aristotle, so it's an image of him, obviously, and he came up with a way to describe the cornerstones of successful persuasion a long, long time ago, and they have not changed. And these are sort of guiding things in the way we think about our work. When you're trying to influence a decision maker or anybody, whoever it is that's got the power to give you what you want, including the bedtime example, you've got to use three things: logic, emotion, and character. You want to know and understand and impact what that person thinks, what that person feels, and something that relates to their character. That is absolutely the same thing today. And so that kind of research is helpful in terms of setting up the power dynamic. The second power tool here is coalition building and maintenance. This is probably one of the hardest in some ways because when you're doing it well, it's yucky. Good coalitions are diverse. They have conflicting points of difference at very key and critical times. When you're working with youth and you have mixed youth and adult coalitions, this is a particularly awkward point sometimes, and I think where sometimes we lose the authenticity of youth engagement because adults don't know what the heck to do with these youth organizations and vice versa. And yet coalitions are really important because if we go back to remembering that our job is to influence decision makers, we're going to influence decision makers by convincing them that lots and lots of people are going to be happy or not mad if they do a certain thing. And coalitions are a really effective mechanism for doing that because we're able to say to them, if you do this, you can make all these people happy, as opposed to making them choose between causes that look the same. And most of our causes look the same to a decision maker, particularly in a state legislature or city hall, where they're hearing from thousands and thousands of causes all day long. It's our job to narrow the agenda and bring to them a very clear pathway and show them that if they do this, it will be good for them and give them some political kudos. There are, in our dream world, coalitions would have 4 levels of membership. In the center, what you've got are sort of the inner circle. These are organizations or people who share your mission. They're right there with you. If it's a tobacco control coalition, these would be groups like the American Heart Association, the Cancer Society, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, the Lung Association. They have to be there with you. That second circle are invested friends, and those are organizations who share your vision. They might care about kids. They might care about health. They might care about your issue, broadly speaking. But they're not going to fall on the sword for your particular cause. Your priority might be the 3rd priority on their list, but they're with you. The next layer are self-interested allies, and these are organizations, sometimes they're companies, sometimes they're individuals, who share your goal because if you win, they win. These are groups who maybe, I like to use the example about, pharmaceutical companies who make a smoking cessation product and are willing to invest in advocacy campaigns around smoke-free work sites. They're not necessarily doing it because smoke-free work sites is their priority. However, their data tells them that when smokers work in smoke-free environments, their desire to quit and their success with quit attempts goes through the roof. So they're doing it because they know if you win your smoke-free campaign, they stand a chance of driving up demand for tobacco treatment products. So they have their own interests. At the very outer circle are opportunistic recruits. And these are organizations or individuals who you recruit to be part of your campaign or cause simply because they have a relationship to those decision makers you're trying to influence. So when you're looking at coalition lists and there's some group on there that makes you say, I wonder why Joe's Auto Body is on this, or a particular community group or something like this, probably it's because Joe's Auto Body has some relevance to the elected official or the school principal or whatever it is that you're trying to influence. And the next power tool, this is a description from a white paper that M+R produced not that long ago on coalitions, and it describes the 3 different types of coalitions and sort of how they vary. And this is really important because I might say coalition and it means something to me, and it means something very different to Laurie Jo and to Brittany, and it's important that we allow sort of mental room for all 3 types of coalitions as opposed to trying to force coalitions to be what our picture is. So in a letterhead coalition, we've got organizations that are doing things like sign-on letters, sharing a press conference. A higher lift would be an issue-based alliance, which would do those things, but would also share strategy, coordinate messaging, and maybe share some resources. And in a formal, very formal coalition, you might have things like bylaws, regular meetings, committee chairs, all of that, do all of the things that you see listed there, and then share branding and show some sort of a unity. And I'm sure you can all imagine those different layers of coalitions, and they're all equally difficult, I think, but critical. The last power tool I'm going to go over before I hand it to Diane to walk through the last three are grassroots and grass tops. And these are grassroots people are defined by the fact that they are represented by a number of people in all sorts of different settings that represent their issues. So you could be a student in a school district, and a superintendent may view you as a grassroots constituent. Whether you describe yourself as that or not doesn't really matter. Or a parent that's part of the PTA, you have some relationship to people in power that they are supposed to represent or at least take stock in your perspective. It's more easily understood when you think about the political framework, and this pyramid here sort of shows the continuum of grassroots to grass tops. So at the bottom of it, you see a constituent. So somebody who lives in a particular district would be a constituent. A student who goes to a particular school is a constituent. A voting constituent has a little bit more power because they're showing up. They're taking an active role in things. An active voting constituent has a little bit more power than a regular constituent. An active voting constituent and donor has a little bit more power because they're showing that they have some skin in the game. They're willing to write a check or put some investment into supporting the political process. Whether they're putting it into your campaign or not, or your cause or not, doesn't matter, because people know if you're donating money for political causes, it's all public information from an individual point of view and can be tracked. But if you're like an active member of a student body and doing all sorts of things that are visible, you probably have more power and authority within that school building than students who aren't doing anything and aren't participating. And it's sort of the same thing. At the very top is people who personally know their decision maker, and this is where you become sort of a grass top person and a more hoo-ha type person. And these are folks who really just have more direct access and more candid communication with a decision maker because they know them personally or they have some expertise around the issue. So if it's a youth-related issue and you're a youth and you're involved, you become a grass tops person automatically. But you could be somebody, under the age of 18 and not voting and still be more important as a leader in a community because you directly know that decision maker. And we try to emphasize this a lot when we're working with people under the age of 18. Don't worry that you don't vote yet. Get to know that decision maker personally, and you have more authority and influence and connection with them than I ever will as a lobbyist or somebody working for a nonprofit. So that is sort of the first three power tools in a nutshell. Diane?
Thanks, Laurie. So I'm going to talk next about the next power tool, which is fundraising and development. And there's a couple different pieces to this. We refer to this as a three-sided coin, which makes it truly funny money. And it's an odd thing, but there's three pieces to this that we want to really think about. First is we need money to run our campaigns. And so in any advocacy campaign, we have to figure out realistically what's it going to cost and where are we going to find that money to have the resources to run our campaigns. And that's sometimes as far as advocacy organizations and coalitions go. And we really want to go two additional layers to that. The next one is really thinking about how can we engage our financial supporters, so those who are our donors and our funders, in our advocacy work through their relationships they already have and relationships that they can maybe open the door to us for us. So in other words, really looking at our donors as potential advocates for us and really saying, who do they know and who are they willing to introduce us to, and how can we leverage those financial supporters in our advocacy work. We often say every advocate should be asked to be a donor and every donor should be asked to be an advocate. They may not play with you in both ways, but we should always be asking. And the third piece to this is really thinking about how can we leverage our advocacy campaign to raise money for our organization beyond this campaign. And so really not missing the opportunity to raise money. The biggest way that we can sell ourselves to a potential donor is by virtue of our advocacy goals. And so to really look at our advocacy campaigns that we're currently working on as an opportunity to raise some money for our organization beyond this campaign. And again, all three are important, and too often I think we forget about the second two. And so we really want to be thinking about that as a power tool and integrating that with the rest of our campaign advocacy planning. The next power tool is media advocacy. And by virtue, what we mean when we say media advocacy, we're not talking about public relations. We're not talking about paid media, although we might be. But we're really talking much more often about what we call earned media or free media. We're really talking about getting our issue, and not our names or our organization's names, but our issue to be talked about and covered in the media that matters to a decision maker. And so that means that, there's lots of different media outlets, but it means we really want to think about our media strategy should absolutely be targeted on those decision makers. And what media do they pay attention to? What do they listen to? And once we know that, and we know our audience who we're trying to influence through the media, then we really work on crafting our message and identifying who are the right and the best messengers. And there's lots of different options when we think about media advocacy in today's world. It's very different than it used to be. We still certainly have traditional newspaper media outlets and radio and television, but we've got lots and lots of social media opportunities. As Laurie said earlier, some of our decision makers have a real presence, and they're listening to people and paying attention to people on Twitter and Facebook. Maybe there's blogs that they read frequently and really pay particular attention to. So when we think about our media advocacy, we want to be thinking about all those different potential pieces of media. But again, what's most important to those decision makers, and how can we get our issue to be really talked about and debated in those media outlets? And if we do media advocacy right, it should make the decision maker a little bit uncomfortable, and often it makes us a little bit uncomfortable, because if we do it right, it's not just putting out a press release and having it printed verbatim. It's about really getting the issue out there to be debated, which means we lose a bit of control in terms of how the story goes, and that's the whole point. Last, but certainly by no means least, the last power tool is decision maker advocacy. And I just want to sort of say, just to remind people, when we say decision maker advocacy, we're not just talking about lobbying, although lobbying is a piece of decision maker advocacy. It's one piece. We're really talking about cultivating decision makers, educating decision makers, getting to know them, building relationships with them. And yes, certainly lobbying is a part of this. But it's much broader than just lobbying. Just to sort of talk, what are we talking about when we say a decision maker? Decision maker is it's really anyone who has that power to give you what it is that you want to achieve. And so depending on what your advocacy goal is, it could be, and in many cases it is an elected official, it's a state or a federal lawmaker, or a city, local level city councilor or mayor. It could be a parent. It could be an employer. It could be a school committee or a school superintendent. It could be a specific department. It could be a Department of Health. There's a lot of different answers to what is the decision maker. It's obviously all focused around what your advocacy goal is, and really being very, very specific, and we have to really be specific. It's not good enough to say, well, the state legislature is our decision maker. There are key decision makers. It's too broad. Who specifically? Who at the end of the day has the power to say yes or no? And generally that usually comes down to one, two, or a small handful of individuals. So once we know who our decision makers are, then we really want to get to know everything we can get to know about those decision makers. And that's some of the stuff that you see around the circles around the decision maker here. We call this pathways of influence research, and this is really about getting to know as much as we can about those decision makers so that we can really, as Laurie said earlier, understand how they tick, what makes them tick, what are their positions as well as their aspirations, what do they care about, what matters to them, and therefore how can we best appeal to them. And I think it's important to remember Ben Franklin, another wise man. We talked about Aristotle. Here's another one. He said, if you would persuade, you must appeal to interest rather than intellect. He did not mean that the decision makers are not smart or that they don't think. What he means by this, and I think it's really true in advocacy, is that if we're going to be persuasive, at the end of the day it comes down to what's in the motivated self-interest of that decision maker. We're going to need to try to make it, appeal to that self-interest so that we can get them to yes. Because at the end of the day, it's really about making it easy for them to do that. Make it easy for them to say yes and difficult for them to say no. So ways that we use the Power Prism, we use it in two kind of big ways, for planning and also for structure. So when we think about planning ways that we use the Power Prism, We use this on the front end of a campaign to do some kind of big picture comprehensive campaign planning. The framework really forces us to be integrated in our approach and make sure that we're building power in all 6 areas rather than focusing on just 1 or 2. We also can use it as a framework for describing our funding needs. We can use it for case statements and grant applications. We also use it, and we do this with a lot of clients, as a rapid response and event campaign planning format or framework. So really, when things are happening in a campaign, something happens, there's a campaign event opportunity to really do some short-term, more reactive planning, and it works really well in that way. In terms of structure, it's a great training framework for staff and volunteers. We have a lot of clients that organize their coalition subcommittees and their meeting agendas around the power tools, because really, truly, to be successful in advocacy, if we're doing all 6 of these power tools well, we're going to likely be very successful in our campaigns, and at a minimum, we're building power for this campaign as well as the next one. And so what we do with the Power Prism is we stop when there's an event that happens, something either that we plan or something happens outside of our event, our campaign. We stop, we think about, we brainstorm all the different things that we could do within the 6 power tool areas, and then we've got to really prioritize, pick and choose. We can't do them all. So stop, think, brainstorm a very big list, and then really prioritize and pick and choose. And as I said earlier, our #1 job as advocates is to make it easy for decision makers to give us what we want, or really hard for them to ignore us. And so that's what the Power Prism really helps us to do. So that's the Power Prism in a very quick overview. We've got, I know, 2 real experts in the room here on youth development. I don't know if Laurie Jo and Brittany have any questions you want to ask of Laurie and I before we transition into your section of the presentation.
Yes, actually we do. We do a good question as a transition question. We know you work with lots of nonprofits and government-funded programs, both large ones and small ones. So what we'd really like to know is if you're trying to get these organizations to engage young people, what selling points do you use? I mean, we work with young people. It's the focus of, in our program within Health Resources in Action, it's the focus of all that we do. But I know it's not the focus of all you do. So what are some of the reasons that you give to encourage organizations to engage young people, since we're transitioning to that piece?
Yeah, that's a good marketing question. So you could think more about. We probably should do more of it, but I think there's a handful of things I would say to a nonprofit that's doing systems change or advocacy or policy work about the values of including youth. One is it makes you legitimate, especially if your cause includes young people. If it has to do with improving the lives or changing the lives of young people, either because it's their lives or their parents' lives or the community, the environment, they should be involved, and they're really great at engaging each other. It makes your coalition, your campaign, a little bit more genuine. Young people get better answers to questions when they're talking to decision makers or the media, as well as from adult organizations. I think there's something very real about they're less varnished than sometimes we bring into a room, and I think that's important. It kind of keeps us all real. The creativity factor goes through the roof. I have learned, and Brittany deserves a lot of credit for teaching me this a number of years ago, I think that we need as adults to be less focused on everybody following the same roadmap for change, but when working with youth, and I think this is proven to be true with adults, you set a common goal together. You're very clear on what the end goal is, but then you have to trust them to find their own way to that and make it safe, give them the training and the tools to get there, but there has to be that ability, which brings me to trust. I mean, I think the other thing you bring into the room is trust. The turf issues that we may have with adult-only organizations and our coalition partners is history. We're fighting for the same funders. We're fighting for the same media space. We're fighting for brand recognition. The youth don't care about these things. There's just a very different level of that. They're honest with you. I've been in too many meetings where the youth's eyes would glaze over and they would look at you and say, I don't know what you're saying. I don't care what you're saying. You're not saying in a way that I understand, and that isn't that they're being rude, but they're sort of explaining to us in their own way that we're not communicating any way that's going to influence anybody who already doesn't think like we think, and I think that's critical. It's much more fun, I think, to work with youth and to have them engaged in campaign coalitions. And the last thing I would think about, and I promise I will be more mindful with my clients in this going forward, is the leadership development piece. And I thought back a lot on the almost 20 years that I've had a benefit of working in tobacco control, and I think of some of the youth leaders that I've known over the years. And I don't think at the time we were building the next generation of leadership for tobacco control or public health intentionally. I don't think that was our plan. It should have been. But then I think about people like, Christine Ortiz and Sam Allen and Cynthia Lesh and Katie Spears and Vicki Hebert and Courtney Otto and Jeff Jordan and Catherine Klim and on and on and on. And all of these young people who were kids, as we call them, and youth leaders have gone on to do great, wonderful things in their adult lives, whether they're, the tobacco is part of it, but it's not all of it. And I think that's really pretty awesome. So I think those would be the reasons I would say and will say, I promise to organizations to consider really actively engaging youth. And we're happy to turn it over to HRIA to lead us through their experience on this.
Yeah, and before I just do that really quickly, I just want to remind people that you are welcome to submit questions at any time through the question box on your computers. So feel free to do that at any time. And we'll get to those at the end, for sure.
Well, thank you, both Laurie and Diane. And that was a great segue into talking about our part of this webinar. We have been working, both Brittany and I, with young people and engaging them in advocacy for many years. And I think all the things, Laurie, that you said are the real reasons to do that. As I said, our part of our program is a part of our larger organization that works with many different audiences, but our main focus has been working with youth and those who serve youth, the adults who work with them and support them. And we've actually found that is a really important place. So I imagine there's mostly adults on the line today, that we really need to train the adults and really get the adults excited about engaging youth, and I'm sure many of you who are on today are already, before to really continue the movement. Because one thing about young people is they don't stay young. They move on and they become those leaders. And we have many. I've worked with peer leaders or youth leaders for, as I said, over 20 years, and I've seen many not only become leaders in public health, but become leaders in schools and youth programs, start their own schools, start their own youth programs. So it's really a wonderful thing to watch, to be a part of. So we wanted to start off with this slide because it really has been an evolution. When I started doing work in public health, it was really focused on more on the individual young person in all of these contexts, and really training them and working with them in the original peer educator model for young people training other young people. And then what we found as public health evolved that into really targeted the environment is how important it was, because they were strategies that connected to all youth, not just the youth that you were focusing on at the moment, that they changed things as laws and regulations and access policies changed for all young people. And what's even more fascinating and more wonderful is that when we involve young people in that kind of change, it even engages them further and builds the kind of competencies, knowledge, and skills that we really are really important in the youth development approach to the work we're doing. So that is so that's sort of a little bit of the background of what we found moving towards the environmental strategies is really engaging young people in them. And we found that we have to always start with youth development. That's really the place where our work has found that sweet spot with public health and engaging young people. And youth development is used a lot now, the term, and so we just want to spend a couple moments defining it a little more clearly. What is youth development? To start off, it's really an approach that you can use with any work you do with young people. It's a human development approach. And so if there's child development, there's youth development, and there's human development. So it's something that you can really integrate into any kind of programming. And it does have some very specific pieces that work very well when we're talking about engaging young people in advocacy and really in social change. So what is youth development? Well, it's used as resources, not recipients. So when do we really believe, and again, this echoes what Laurie was saying, do we really believe we value young people and value what they're bringing and what their knowledge and their skills that they already have in their experience and their ability to reach other young people? And the goal is really not just about prevention. It's not just about fixing them. It's really developing them for their life. And that by just preventing problems, it's not going to promote development. We can't just talk about don't do this, and we know that in public health, but even just focusing on violence prevention or on physical health nutrition doesn't necessarily continue to get people to be not violent or eat healthy and practice physical health, what we really need to do is look at the whole young person and really help them build themselves into a healthy young person and a healthy adult. And the lastly, which we'll talk a lot about today, is so where are the young people? And that's the engaging part. If we're going to help young people build skills and knowledge and grow, we need to engage them in exciting ways to do so, and advocacy is a perfect way to do that. So just quickly, a definition that we use, and I know there's a lot of definitions of youth development, but we like this one. It comes from the Advancing Youth Development curriculum. We use it in all of our training for youth work and for youth workers in youth development and all those who work with youth. But it's really a process by which young people develop those positive developmental outcomes. So the skills and knowledge that young people need to get to those positive outcomes of responsibility and autonomy, of civic engagement, of planning for the future, of leading healthy lives mentally and physically. Those are the outcomes that we know we need for young people, and how we help them to build these outcomes because they're necessary for their adolescent and adult life. And again, it's based not just on their needs, but on their capacities and strengths. Based on their capacities, strengths, and formative needs. I think what's really important about this, if you think if you're hiring somebody and someone comes into your office in a hiring situation and they tell you, well, you know about them that they don't use drugs and they're not violent and they graduated from college, would you hire them? Probably not. You would want to know a lot more about them than that. You would want to know their experience and their skills and their passions and their knowledge and what they want to do and where they want to go and who their mentors have been and how they've gotten to where they are. And you might even, in our interviews, we have people demonstrate a training, and because that's what we hire people for. So you might want to see some of their skills. So that's really what youth development is saying. We can't just talk about achievement kinds of outcomes like getting degrees or prevention kind of outcomes like not doing all the negative things we don't want them to do. We really need to talk about what we call developmental outcomes, which are here, and through the work we do, we've come up with these, through the Advancing Youth Development curriculum, actually we've come up with these 12 outcomes that really, I think, encompass what a healthy person looks like, a young person and a healthy person. And if we think about this connection to advocacy, how are we helping to build these kind of outcomes in this work that we're doing with young people? And I think you can point really clearly to probably many of them. There's some overlap, and these are outcome areas. Underneath them, you'll find things like conflict resolution skills, organizing skills, being able to talk to, communication skills, to be able to talk to adults, to talk to decision makers. All of those kind of skills and knowledge can fall under many of these areas. So that's really sort of the little core piece of youth development that I'm going to talk about today. Is it's really an approach to helping young people build these outcomes. And how do we help them build it? Well, by engaging them. That's the other main piece of youth development. It's about young people being engaged at a lot of different levels of participation. So all the way from the very beginning to maybe being smallly involved, that we really hope to build their engagement as they get more involved with us to really leadership, as Laurie mentioned, really leadership positions. So, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment. So, can advocacy coexist with youth development? Well, absolutely. And that's really fostering the strengths and capacities of meeting the needs of youth to address tobacco prevention and all kinds of prevention. We have a lot of experience in tobacco prevention because we've been very fortunate to have a state that has really supported young people's engagement over the years in advocacy around tobacco. But we also have a lot now, we also know from these experiences with the tobacco prevention world that it's really applicable to many other kinds of advocacy and other kinds of topics. So yes, youth development is an approach you can use with advocacy. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll pass it over to Brittany to actually give you some more specific examples and how it connects with the Power Prism tool that we've just heard about earlier, is that we have developed training for young people around advocacy. Training for young people, then obviously training for adults who support those young people, which is a little bit a different set of training. But these are the kind of training that we really believe young people need to have to be able to understand advocacy. Lots of times young people get left out because we don't think they care, we don't think they're interested, and they may just not know what we're talking about because we use a lot of acronyms, and we talk about things where maybe if we just spent some time in really training young people, they would engage right away. And the most amazing thing about young people is once you get them excited about something, passionate about something, they have an incredible force of moving in and focusing on with that passion, trying to create change with that passion. So there's just a list of topics here about the kind of training that we really do provide to young people. And it's very interactive, it's very activity-based, so they can continue to build those skills as they get trained, and then to go out and practice in the world through a lot of different programs and practices, these training skills that they've learned in a training. So now we're going to transition, and Brittany's going to talk about how some of the practices in the world, how they exist and how they connect with the Power Prism.
Thanks so much, LJ. And so what I want to do right now, Laurie Jo has given a little bit of background around what we've done in engaging youth in advocacy and some of the trainings that we've provided. And we want to connect this intentionally with the Power Prism. And so just to start, I want to give just a few ideas for each area of the Power Prism for how we can engage youth in different strategies. So as Laurie mentioned, we need to start with research and data collection. It's the one thing we have to always do first. And so some of the ways that we've engaged youth through research and data collection has been through surveys, person on the street surveys, or focus groups. Walk audits are another way that we've engaged young people as well, so that they can really document their neighborhoods and what they see on a daily basis. And photo voice and video voice, which is attached to that, is another way that we've really seen young people get excited to document through photography, through video, what they see on a daily basis. Coalition building and maintenance, working with young people and working with adults to figure out how to work with young people. It's a really bi-directional relationship that we want to build with youth and adults, and so in order to create healthy and thriving coalitions. In fundraising and development, finding ways to engage youth in fundraising, as Laurie Jo, Laurie, and Diane have said, youth are compelling when they believe in something, and they can be fantastic spokespeople for your cause. And so getting them engaged in fundraising and development is a key strategy for sustainability, for creating energy in your movement as well. Looking at grassroots in key contexts. If you want to get a lot of people to pack a room, have young people go and bring their friends, get them impassioned about the work that you're doing. That is a way to really influence the causes that you're trying to promote, to influence decision makers as well. So they're really important in terms of building grassroots momentum around your cause. Media advocacy, we have the traditional media, but let me tell you, young people know social media and new media way better than any of us probably on the phone know it. It's amazing to me how whenever we're trying to engage youth in media, they have more ideas than we do in ways to use Twitter and Facebook and all of those other fun social media networks that we as adults may not be on. And as it has been mentioned, a lot of legislators, a lot of officials, a lot of decision makers are really starting to use those as tools to engage as well. So it only benefits us to engage young people in their expertise to get involved with media advocacy. And finally, decision maker advocacy, I think linked with all of this, meeting with public officials, having youth meet with public officials, meet with stakeholders. And in the tobacco prevention work that we've been doing, we've had youth meet with legislators at the State House, and there is nothing more compelling than young people who really believe in what they're talking about. And that is a way to get public officials and stakeholders on your side. And so I'm going to talk a little bit, those are just some of the strategies, but I want to talk a little bit in depth about two case studies of how we have seen youth making huge differences in their communities through advocacy. So the first example that I'd like to share about is from Chelsea Reach, which is an after-school leadership program that aims to reach youth at risk, that are at risk of dropping out of school. And Chelsea Reach does an amazing job of building the skills and knowledge of young people through the youth development approach. And the strategy that they take for school retention to promote school retention is through really engaging young people in their school and community and making change in their school and community. So this project started in November of 2012, and we started getting engaged with them at the start of 2013. And about 20 10th and 11th graders at Chelsea High School, who are part of an after-school leadership program, they were asked what they would like to change in their school and community. And this is the first thing that's really important, to really ask young people what they care about and what they want to change. I think a lot of times with us adults, we might have our own preset agenda. And so if we really want to bring young people on board, if we really want to authentically engage them, it's really important to see what are the things that they are concerned about. So for these young people, they talked about the concern of safety. And there were a variety of different concerns that were connected to the issue of safety. And one of these main concerns was that they didn't like the fact that their streets were dirty and they felt unsafe when they were walking on them. And so the group undertook a walk audit of their neighborhood, of the neighborhood that surrounded the school, and found that there were a number of problems that they wanted to be addressed. This included missing sidewalks, insufficient lighting, litter, and either absent or faded crosswalks. So students were then, this walk audit was really the research and data collection phase where they could, even though they knew that they were feeling unsafe, they could really document the why and what they are seeing and what they are experiencing on a regular basis. So then the coalition building phase came where we were training young people on how to define a good issue, what is winnable, what is it that they want, and who has the power to give them what they want. So those were a number of things that we had young people really think about, and we had them, we trained them in advocacy tactics and other things like that. And they also, as I mentioned, they were identifying who has the power to give them what they want, and they identified the director of Chelsea's Department of Public Works. And so then the decision maker advocacy came in where the young people went and met with the department director, and they brought a letter describing their concerns, shared what they wanted. They brought photos and a drawn map that showed that they wanted new crosswalks. That was what they identified as something that was winnable for them. They wanted to have new crosswalks. And so because of their advocacy, they were actually able to accomplish their goal. And in July of 2013, so next month, there has been a commitment made to complete the set of crosswalks that they were asking for. And so this is a great example of young people identifying their issue, identifying what they wanted to see, and also not only did they get what they wanted, which is crosswalks, they're also more engaged, more passionate, and more invested in staying in school. And so that also has the whole youth development, it really promotes youth development as well. The second example I want to give really quickly, as I know we're coming close to time, is we worked with the Hope Coalition in Worcester. And Hope Coalition is part of the 84 movement, which is a youth tobacco prevention movement in the state of Massachusetts. And it's a program of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, which is developed and managed in partnership with us here at Health Resources in Action. And so the Hope Coalition looked at their neighborhoods and realized that they were just disturbed by the youth were disturbed by the fact that there was a high prevalence of smoking in their city, and they wanted to see that change. And so what they did was they embarked on research and data collection, and they actually mapped their city and looked at the number of tobacco vendors by census tract, by income, by proximity to school, and by age. And they were able to really document that the tobacco industry was targeting young people. They were targeting poor communities, and they were targeting communities of color. And they wanted to change that. And so they then, after they were able to collect the maps, or they were able to create some maps, they embarked upon coalition building, where a team of youth were trained and supported to make changes. And then they met with community leaders. They collected letters of support from their peers and community organizations and community members. They, as Laurie was mentioning, they have a lot of creativity, and so they would stage die-ins. One of the things that they wanted to do was ban the sale of tobacco in pharmacies. And so they went in front of a pharmacy in their community, and they announced what they were about to do, and they all lay down or died in front of the pharmacy. And they were able to attract quite a bit of press attention because of that. And they're really sending the message that the tobacco industry should not be targeting their communities. Tobacco should not be sold in places that promote health. And that's some of the creativity that young people can bring to advocacy work. And they met numerous times with and secured the support from their mayor, and they met numerous times with city councilors, with businesses, and they were actually able to promote, so they were able to successfully ban the sale of tobacco in pharmacies, and they were also able to revise the signage ordinance for local storefronts, limiting the amount of advertising that would be on their storefront windows. And that, in effect, will decrease the amount of tobacco advertising, junk food advertising, as well as alcohol advertising. So it's a win on many different fronts. It also makes their community more beautiful, makes the community more safe. And so young people were able to really identify this as those issues as the issues that they really wanted to take on in order to promote the health of their community.
So just in the last couple minutes, and then we can get to questions, we wanted to just point out some of the barriers to engaging young people that have come up to us, and some of the same things that Laurie and Diane mentioned. Well, recruiting youth, finding youth themselves, sort of time, and both in many ways that it requires time to work with young people, and then also this whole issue of timing of youth schedules, that in our society many young people are in school, some are not, but many are in school, and so it is challenging for us when we do work to remember that and to also work outside of those school hours. And then just you really need to do this work to have staff dedicated to working with young people, whether you're in an adult coalition that wants to engage youth or obviously a full youth program. But the staff doesn't have to be full-time, but there needs to be someone who is really dedicated. And many of our, as I just mentioned, many of our agencies are really adult-focused. And so how do we break that culture and really let young people in? And that can be true of many different cultures, not only adult to youth. But how do we really open up our comfort zones and let young people be a part of them? Along with that is adults valuing those, really valuing and really wanting to be around young people, believing them, having fun with them, connecting with them. Young people really do believe in relationships. They say the 3 R's of youth development are relationships, 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 as opposed to 3 L's of real estate location. So I think, so that's a very important piece. And then also just this issue, how do we really reach past our own comfort zones and really build relationships with diverse young people? Like the young people that Brittany was mentioning from Chelsea Reach, they were young people who were struggling sometimes to stay connected to school, but this advocacy project really engaged them. They invested, and that is a way to engage young people who aren't necessarily just the leaders and the ones that are going to come automatically, but young people from a variety of backgrounds. So I think for all of these things, it requires intentionality. How you recruit youth, finding people, finding staff, finding the time. It really means that you make a dedicated piece of your work and your time to do this. It doesn't have to be incredibly expensive, and it doesn't have to be the only thing you do, but it does require intentionality. And some of the things we're going to be talking about next are going to be addressing those barriers. So Brittany's going to talk a little bit about engaging youth in some meaningful ways.
Great, and I think a lot of these were already touched upon in our conversations, but I just want to emphasize a few points about how we can engage youth in meaningful ways. The first is making room for young people to get involved. And youth-led projects, I might modify that to say youth-led and adult-supported projects, can take on many different forms. It can be as simple as engaging in art class in, or young people who might be more artistically inclined, in creative projects to promote health and prevent tobacco use and promote healthy eating and active living. Or it can be all the way up to young people engaged in policy change, as we talked about before. But any entry point for young people to get engaged with your work is a powerful thing. And over time, as you build relationships, as Laurie Jo was mentioning, and trust, young people can take on more leadership and more opportunities within your project. The other important thing that I want to mention is the importance of authentic connection to issues. I think a lot of us have oftentimes agendas of what we want to talk about or what we want to accomplish, the issues we need to tackle. It could be based on funding. It could be based on trends in the public health field. But the bottom line is, if we really want to authentically engage young people in the issues that we are interested in, we need to make sure that it's an issue that they also care about as well. And so, for example, with Chelsea Reach, they didn't just say, we want you to work on X, Y, or Z. They said, what are the issues that you're most concerned about? Similarly with Hope Coalition identified themselves that they were concerned about the disparities in their community around tobacco prevention, or around tobacco advertising and tobacco retail stores. So that's something to think about as well. Another important thing to think about is youth are really the insiders. We talk a lot about adolescent health in the public health field, and youth are the ones who know this the best. We've seen this in tobacco prevention a lot, where currently the tobacco industry is promoting other tobacco products that are fruit flavored and shiny, with shiny, colorful packaging. And a lot of times young people are totally aware of these products, whereas we as adults have no idea they're there or don't know what they are. So young people are really our eyes and ears in our communities to see how can we promote health that will authentically and actually make a difference in the lives of young people. And the last thing I want to mention is decision making, where young people can be engaged in many different decision making opportunities, and also can be engaged in working with decision makers as well. So we talked quite a bit about that, and so I want to keep moving. Thank you.
So the last couple things are just practical strategies to really engaging young people. So how do we, in any, particularly in youth-adult collaborations, so really taking the time, and it does involve time, to have youth and adults co-facilitate, even on agendas have time when there's only youth, because there is always that power dynamic. And we've talked, and we have had I've had many conversations about this. Why don't young people speak up? Why aren't young people a part of it? Well, even if they're at the table, they may not feel comfortable, because there's definitely a power dynamic of folks being older, of folks maybe knowing more about the issue, of being comfortable with each other. So there's some different ways here to really think about having young people engaged, with the ratio being more equal, scheduling time when young people attend, and then the relationship piece, having youth and adults be buddies and maybe intentionally set that up. And the adults can really end up enjoying that as much as the young people. And obviously food and fun, figure out ways to integrate that into any meetings. Again, I think that can be great for whatever coalition you're working with. Finally, the last one is really about building relationships. And these are pretty basic things, but they're interesting that sometimes we do forget them. Really listening, don't always have the answer, respecting each of us. Hold high expectations for young people, and they'll step up to them. Don't lie to them, and be patient, and enjoy them. Enjoy being with young people. I was at the Gay Pride parade in Boston this weekend, and I always love it because it's such a joyful time, and I was screaming and yelling for all the groups, but I could visibly see these young people marching in the parade when you were yelling for them, how much they felt valued, that people cared about them, particularly young people who may have faced a lot of discrimination. So, and that, to me, is the joy of this. It's not only creating change in our society through policies and through the work we do, but it's creating youth development and supporting young people's growth in the best ways. And my own growth, as an adult, all those wonderful young people I've gotten to know. So I think that's really the ending piece. We want to stop on. We do have some resources, and we have a couple minutes left for questions.
We do. So you can see on the screen here, and one of the questions that people wrote in, which so I'll ask as we show this, is would the slides be available? They will. We will make those available to you, and so you'll have these resources in the PowerPoint. But you can see here there's just a couple of resources we've included, and we will go to questions, but I'll leave this up on the screen as well. This is our contact information, as well as our websites, powerprism.org. We've got some specific power tools that go along with Power Prism Advocacy Framework that you can find there, and HRIA's website, lots of great resources there as well.
And I would just say that Youth Work Central, which is a resource on the slide before, is one of our websites. It's an HRA website. It's got a different name. So.
And the other resource that we, I think, may have neglected to list on the slides, but that we will list on there before we send this out to folks, is the M+R Strategic Services website. There's lots of great resources, including several really brilliant white papers that Laurie and I didn't write, so we can say that they're brilliant. And that's the MRSS.com, and we'll send the link. We'll include the link in the resource section of that as well. I had a question, and then there's a few that were written in, and we won't have time to get to all of them, unfortunately. But one that I did want to make sure that we asked to Laurie Jo and Brittany. We had recently heard a youth advocacy leader in North Carolina make the case for paying youth, compensating youth for involvement in advocacy campaigns. Just curious as to your thoughts about whether it's necessary, essential, a good thing, a bad thing. What are your thoughts about that?
In our experience, I would go back to what we were saying before about making equal playing field. If we're being paid to be a part of a project, if it's our job. I think that it's also really important for young people to have that experience, not only experience, but have the value of being paid. Paid work is different than volunteer work. It doesn't mean that volunteer work isn't important, but I think you have a different set of expectations for volunteers. You manage it differently. Young people that can be a part of something and also get paid to do it places a certain value on their work. So we have always really supported that. I also think young people are incredibly busy. They have a lot in their lives. And particularly if you want to engage diverse young people from lower economic backgrounds, that can be very helpful to have some stipends or funding. I think it can work not to pay young people, but as I said, it's a different set of expectations that you have to have.
Great. Another question, and we've heard this, it was written differently than I'm probably going to say it, but hopefully it answers, we can get to it. But can you just say a little bit more about some of the challenges with adult youth coalitions? You both have talked about bidirectional and things like that, but I'd like to hear a little bit more expansion. Like what are the challenges of it? Because I think that's a huge area for the adult part of the coalition.
Well, I'll start, and Laurie Jo
Sure.
can add. So I think one of the barriers definitely can be agendas, for example, and agendas and time. And so a lot of times adults and youth have their own agenda and have their own interest areas that they're interested in working on. You have to spend the time to find common ground. And I think a lot of times in our rushed world, in our go society, it's really difficult to find those opportunities to create the space and have young people and have adults authentically dialogue about the things that they care about. And so I think for the success of an adult youth coalition, it really is important that you take that time to build relationships, to find common ground, and to find out sometimes you care about the same thing, but you frame it differently. And so finding those points of commonality really can help to the success and sustainability of your partnerships together. So that's one thing I would throw out.
And I think it is a challenging coalition, and I think time is challenging. I don't think we're saying that young people are going to be equal partners in everything. They don't. First of all, they're mostly there, as we said, are in school, many of them, or if they're not in school, they're dealing with other issues. So they're not going to have the same equality as us, most likely. So we need to figure out ways to authentically engage them. And we also need to really buy in the adult members of the coalition that it is valuable. And everyone's not going to believe that. Everyone's not going to agree. Some people are going to think, oh, I don't want to spend time. It's wasteful. I just want to move on the agenda. But we need to, as much as possible, if we really believe in this, bring those people along. And sometimes it's worked successfully to have a separate youth coalition and a separate adult coalition, but bring them together and not just have young people work on the more peripheral, fun things like parties, although that's fine, but are they really working on the meat of the issue, and bring them together at certain pieces along the way. And I also there was a question I noticed here, even today, why aren't young people here leading this webinar? I think it's fine to be advocates for young people. I think there's times and places when young people maybe can't be a part of it. This one could possibly have been because it's after school, but I think young people are very happy with having if they really believe we are authentic and have their best interest at heart, that we can represent them and advocate for them. They know sometimes they aren't going to be able to do it for a variety of reasons, but I also think it's a good idea and another time to have a young person as a part leading a webinar, and that's a great thing we can think about doing for the next step.
Absolutely. So I think we have time for one more very quick question. It's a quick one, I think. It's just the question was, does HRIA train the youth in the key issues before they sort of set priorities? And I would just sort of echo the importance of that question. I know that you guys do because I've seen you do it, and just echo the importance of that, because I think what we've seen in our advocacy work in these adult youth collaborative coalitions is that often the disconnect is around policy selection goals, and so the adults sort of think, well, we know better, or it's too complicated, or whatever. So how do you prepare youth to really engage in that identification selection process?
I think it's not always easy because it depends on a lot of factors. Sometimes funding, sometimes timing, sometimes how the policy gets rolled out. But I think the goal is to always bring young people in as early as possible, have them a part of the beginning. And even if the young people are very clear they can't always make the decisions, we don't always make the decisions. I don't make the decisions. I've been here 20-something years in my organizations. There's some decisions I don't necessarily make. But I'm okay with that because I understand what I do have control control over, what I just can give feedback to. And I think if we're very clear and authentic with young people that if this is an opportunity to give feedback, you might not be the final decision maker because there's other people that are the final decision makers. Young people are fine with that, but bringing them into the table as early as possible is really key. And maybe starting with 1 or 2, if that's what's reasonable. A couple of young people, maybe they could be stipend as a part of your staff, and then build it out from there. And I think we get worried about, oh, how am I going to have 20 young people be a part of this coalition? You start with what you can start with. Take small steps and engage young people along the way as early as possible.
I think that's great. I think that makes sense. And we are going to take one more just because we really thought it was an interesting question, asking about, in terms of the barriers, how do you train the young people as advocates to really persevere through initiatives that, don't work out the way we hope they're going to work out, or the decision makers aren't very receptive?
That's a great question. And, it's one of those things that, as Laurie Jo was saying, being transparent and honest with young people, it's so, there's utmost importance around that because that is the way the world works. And so a lot of times, the most important thing is that the partnership with the young people will persist onwards through the barriers. I'm working right now with Girls Inc. of Lynn in Massachusetts who've been working for 2 years on capping tobacco permits in their city. And they have, there's been roadblocks along the way, but it's been a two-year journey, I would say, not a struggle, a journey. And they just had a breakthrough about a month ago where it looks like the policy might move forward. And so we're incredibly excited about that. But that was, there was patience on their part. There was consistency on our part in checking with them consistently and encouraging them along the way and finding opportunities in those waiting periods to find other ways that they can be engaged and spreading the word about what they're trying to do.
And I just have to add quickly, they have great partners like M+R, to have partners like the Mass Department of Public Health, who has developed and managed the 84, which is our statewide youth tobacco initiative, with us at HRA here. Over years of consistently supporting youth engagement, that's an incredible thing to have as a part of our work, to have these partners that really are consistent as well, because change does take a long time. And I think if we're here and we continue to be here and continue to open the door for young people and have great partners that do as well, that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And adults struggle with it as well.
Yeah.
It looks like it could take a long time.
Right.
Well, we are over time. We want to thank everyone who hung in there for a couple minutes extra. Thank you so much. If we did not get to all of your questions, we can email you responses after the webinar. And as we said, we will email out to all of the attendees on the webinar this PowerPoint slide. Thank you so much for joining today, and we hope you have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.